This is Speak Up. I am Sandra Schulte. Welcome back to our show. Today I'm so fortunate to have Michael Flores with us. Michael is the president and CEO of Bretton Woods. He brings over 30 years of financial services experience with focuses on loan and deposit operations, commercial deposit, and cash management product strategies, alternative financial services, overdraft protection programs, payment systems, process improvement, and re-engineering through enabling technology. I'd say he's pretty well qualified. He began his career at Citizens and Southern National Bank, which is now called the Bank of America. From 1981 to 88, he was Senior Vice President for Bank Earnings International. He was responsible for national strategic planning. He has conducted research on controversial issues, written white papers, and testified before both Congress and the Senate regarding short-term and low-dollar consumer credit options, overdrafts, prepaid cards, and the impact of Dodd-Frank on community banks. But today he's with us to talk about the cannabis industry. Welcome. It's so good to have you with us. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you, Sandra. I look forward to this very much.
Good. How did you get involved in the cannabis banking space?
Interesting. 2 years ago, I received a call from a person I worked with in Washington who is executive director of the Prepaid Card Association. And she said she's now involved in gaining access to financial services for emerging markets, and the first industry is going to be cannabis. She said, are you interested in helping us with that?
Interesting. An emerging market in the United States, not in Africa, for instance.
Right. And so I said, well, my last experience with cannabis was in college, but aside from that, let's see what we can do. And based upon my work with other underbanked markets, whether they were consumers or small to mid-sized businesses, that this would be another high-risk area that I find very interesting and attractive to analyze, research, and help move forward to gain access to traditional banking systems.
When you say underbanks, you mean groups that have trouble getting bank access?
Correct. Whether it's consumers who have bad credit and they've been reported on a system called check systems where they cannot open up a banking account, or small to mid-sized businesses that don't have the capital or the experience to qualify for a banking account. And in this case, with cannabis businesses, you have a problem. You have state legal businesses, but federally it's illegal. And banks with their federal regulators are wary of bringing on those businesses.
What in your banking led you to this, background led you to this?
Well, a lot of work with technologies over the years, but as I mentioned earlier, work with other high-risk markets. And I was asked to do a research survey on small dollar credit for consumers and compare it to what bank offerings were. And these were companies that offered short-term small dollar loans through storefronts or online, and they were being painted with a broad brush saying that they were predatory, it was very expensive credit. And yes, compared to other credit, it is expensive, but used properly, it fits a certain segment of a consumer's needs. It's like anything else. If it's abused, then it could cause harm to the consumer. So I did a comparative analysis that this product used in this circumstance fits a need, and it's appropriately priced, and went through the comparison of other products, all the way from overdrafts through long-term mortgages.
Bring up the first slide, please, called State-Regulated Cannabis Programs.
It's an interesting map. It is changing almost daily. Right now, there are 47 states that have some level of cannabis legalization, whether it's hemp, CBD, or low THC products. medical marijuana, for medicinal purposes, or recreational marijuana.
What is the legal status of cannabis use?
I'm sorry?
What is the legal status of cannabis use?
Federally, it's illegal. It's a Schedule I drug, narcotic. But at a state level, they have, particularly the western states that were early in this process, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, have realized it's like prohibition was for alcohol. People are going to find a way. So the idea is, let's structure it, let's make sure that there's quality, the product has good quality, it's tested, and then we collect taxes on it. And particularly with the downturn over the last several years, states have been struggling for revenue. And this was a way for them to tap another source of revenue. The other issue with legalization, not only the difference between state and federal, each state is unique. Their laws are unique, and then the regulations that are promulgated from those laws are very unique. So if a cannabis business operates in multiple states, or a bank offers services to a cannabis business that operates in multiple states, their compliance costs are extremely high. Now, the other thing to consider too is that, is it a criminal act? It's one thing to say I've legalized the product. It's another thing to say I've decriminalized the product.
The activity around it.
That's right. So even if it's legal, if I do something outside of regulation, if I buy the legal amount I'm allowed, depending on the state, but then sell it to another individual that's outside the scope, or sell it to somebody that's under 21 that's outside the scope of the regulations, then that's a criminal activity. And I can be prosecuted from a felony and have jail time. So some states have decriminalized it, which is to say, if I do something outside the scope of that regulation, then I'll be fined, like a traffic ticket. So not only you have a difference of state and federal, but you also have the criminalization issue. And one more, you've got municipalities. Local towns and cities can pass ordinances, even though the state says it's legal and you could sell through dispensaries, the town or the municipality can say, no, we don't want it in our town.
I would say furthermore, your apartment house could have its own rules.
Absolutely. It could say, if you're a non-smoking building, then that's going to apply to marijuana as well. So yeah, it's going to be a very complex endeavor to enforce the various regulations. I mean, the only winners in this are going to be the lawyers.
You're right. I mean, you gave an example just a few months ago of a person selling something to someone else, but he himself could be flagged because he did some act which is considered prohibited.
That's right. So,
such as smoking maybe in the hallway.
Smoking in the hallway, or in New York State, in New York City primarily, any area that you cannot smoke tobacco, you cannot smoke marijuana. And so if you do smoke it right now, it could be a criminal offense. So it hasn't been decriminalized yet. And recreational marijuana won't be sold through dispensaries until right now, it's estimated it's summer 2023. So you have medical dispensaries, but not recreational dispensaries at this point.
Bring up the next slide, please, called U.S. marijuana market.
This is one estimate. It's a conservative estimate. Right now, we're considering the total legal market to be about $20 billion, approximately half and half between medical and recreational. In 2025, is estimating it to be $25 billion. Forbes came out with an article recently estimating up to $40 billion by 2025. Now, that represents what we think is probably half the market. The other half is going to be what I'll euphemistically call the unlicensed market.
Oh.
So
competition.
That's right. If you look at what the finance people would call the total addressable market, you take those numbers and double them. And the growth trajectory is significant over the next 10 years. And that's why a lot of people are getting into the business. And we'll see here in a minute what segment of the business they're going to look at. But it's dynamic, it's growing, and as I said, right now it's split maybe 40% recreational, 60% medical. We'll see as more states legislate or legalize recreational, how that ratio changes. Is it going to stay approximately 50-50, or will recreational usage take off?
It'll be very interesting because also there'll be a market of lookalikes. In other words, packaging that looks like a noted brand but isn't.
Right, right. And it's interesting you say that packaging and ultimately, when it's decriminalized or legalized at a federal level, I think you're going to see big pharma, big tobacco, all get in to this space. And you're going to see a large consolidation. Right now you have a lot of mom and pop operations, whether they're growers or processors or testing labs, all the way through the dispensaries. I think what will happen ultimately is that they will sell out to the large operators, what we call MSOs, multi-state operators. And at that point, you're going to see a tremendous consolidation. But I think similar to the beer industry, if you go back to Prohibition times, and right after Prohibition, each town had their own brewery. And then you had consolidation with Coors and Budweiser and others gobbling up all these independent breweries. So you had, in essence, maybe 4 or 5 major breweries in the country. Now you see the proliferation of craft beers, craft breweries that are out there. I think cannabis is going to follow that same trajectory.
I'm curious. I know Canada is ahead of the United States.
Right.
Is the gobbling up happening up there, as far as you know?
It's you see some very big operators in Canada, and because they were more progressive in their laws, you did not see the initial proliferation of small businesses. So it's the large operators that are the primary factor in Canada.
Why is access to banking options so important to the cannabis businesses from the cannabis business point of view?
Right now, cannabis operators, cannabis businesses it's a cash business. And operating a total cash environment is risky, it's costly, and to pay their taxes, they have to hire armored car services to take cash to the taxing authorities. It's inefficient from their standpoint, it's inefficient from the taxing authority standpoint. So you have at the state level, initially credit unions, the state chartered credit unions, offering cannabis services, which is to say they can offer an operating account, a checking account, for them to make deposits of cash, because other payment methods aren't allowed. We'll talk about that in a moment. Then some state chartered community banks got involved. There are a handful of smaller regional banks that are doing this at a federal level, but it's primarily the state chartered organizations. And it's because of the safety issues for the employees and the customers of these operations. You're dealing with tens of thousands of dollars in cash on a daily basis, if not more, depending on the size of the operation. And so they're prime targets for theft.
I can just visualize right now people coming through the door with guns.
Oh, the security measures that are needed to operate these organizations is tremendous. Matter of fact, with this not-for-profit I'm working with, the Emerging Markets Coalition, we just wrote a standard for cash management, cash handling for cannabis businesses, all the way from the security measures taken, the routes that the armored car service can take, the scheduling so you're not predictable in the scheduling of your transportation of cash. And the insurance coverage requirements that are needed. So it's quite an undertaking. And to think about this, not only the onerous nature of the security issues that are involved, but it's the licensing and taxation of the various states that at some point in some states is inhibiting the adoption of legal businesses. That is to say, the taxation is so high, some businesses have said our effective tax rate is 85%. And another reason for that, without getting too far into the weeds, is that IRS regulations state on an illegal enterprise, you cannot deduct your general and operating expenses. So you're being taxed on an adjusted gross income level, not a net income level. And so your tax rate is significantly higher.
Bring up the next slide, please. Supply chain.
This is interesting. Most people think of cannabis businesses, they think of the last one, the retail operation or the dispensary. And banks primarily, if they're going to consider banking the cannabis business, they want to consider what element within that supply chain, all the way from the grower to the processor, who takes the raw material, the product, and processes it, whether it's into the buds for smoking or it's into the vaping material or the edibles, the gummies.
Or even just getting rid of certain impurities.
Correct. And then that leads into the testing side of this. There are no federal standards at this point for testing, but there are some quality testing labs that various states utilize. Then you have the transportation or distribution of the product, and then finally the dispensary. So the bank needs to look at, what's my natural market? I had a client in southeast Georgia where they grow Vidalia onions, the sweet onions that people love. And I asked the banker there, I said, what are your thoughts about the farmers here about growing cannabis? And I thought, it's a very conservative area. I thought, there's no way. And he said, quite the opposite. They would be extremely interested to be able to diversify their crops. So it's, the bank should, if they're an agricultural bank, they should look at, number one, the cultivation side of this thing. If they're more in the manufacturing sector, look at the processing. All the way to the retail side, when you look at the dispensary. So the bank has a lot of things to consider. Least of all, reputation risk. How will their board react to wanting you to bank cannabis? How will the customers react, particularly in these small
communities? How will the shareholders react?
Exactly. Particularly in these smaller communities, you may have quite a few objections.
Interesting. Why is it so important to open banking to cannabis business from a banker's point of view?
Bankers look to businesses that can generate a lot of deposits for them. I worked 20-some years ago with a bank in Atlanta. It was a primarily commercial real estate organization funding commercial real estate loans. But they needed funding because they primarily were funding their loans with CDs and their high interest rates. So we looked at homeowners associations and community associations, property managers, as a large source of cheap deposits, and built a product suite that attracted those. So we lowered the cost of funds for the bank significantly by going out to that particular market. Cannabis is the same way. It's deposit rich, tremendous amounts of money. And it could help a bank increase their liquidity, lower their cost of funds, and have more dollars available for lending. Now the bank has to ask themselves, what level of risk do I want? How much of my capital do I want to allocate to this market segment? How much of a concentration do I want to have? It's like all your eggs in one basket. You don't want to have too much of a concentration in one industry.
Legislation can change.
It can. And right now, you still have the possibility, even in a state where it's legal, that the feds can come in and confiscate the assets of a cannabis business if they're doing something that gets their attention, and therefore the bank loses any collateral they may have on loans that they may have to that business. And the bank also has to consider other customers. They may have somebody, a landlord of a strip center that's leasing out a space to a cannabis business. The feds come in and say, federally, that's an illegal business. You have to cease and desist, or we're going to seize the entire shopping center. And if that bank has a loan to that shopping center, to that developer, they're in trouble.
Wow. Wow, not just the business itself, but the whole strip. Oh my God.
All right.
What payment options are cannabis businesses using?
As we mentioned earlier, right now it's primarily cash. But they have looked at workarounds because of the issue with cash. And a lot of consumers are getting acclimated now not to using cash. I pay everything with my iPhone basically right now. I can't tell you the last time I went to a bank to get cash. So some of them are using what's called, or they'll put in cash dispensers, the ATMs. You've seen some restaurants in town that don't accept credit cards, so they'll have an ATM, or a convenience store that has ATMs on site. So people can go and withdraw cash and then buy the product. Another one is called a cashless ATM. So when you go to checkout to pay for your product, you insert your card, and let's say that the purchase price for what you want is $97.50. You withdraw $100. Mm-hmm. And on your bank statement, it's a cash withdrawal. Mm-hmm. The $97.50 goes to the dispensary, and they give you $2.50 back in change. Mm-hmm. Well, Visa has now said, no, that's illegal.
How can they just distinguish between one or the other? Is it clear?
Because they look at what they call merchant category codes. Mm-hmm. And if they're using a Visa branded card, an ATM card, mm-hmm. that has that Visa or MasterCard logo on them, they'll go to the merchant bank and say, this is an illegal business. From a federal level, Visa will not process transactions for illegal products.
Well, I hate to think that guy who has that business going home at night with a lot of cash put on his mattress.
Well, it's almost what it's like. And the other options, some unique ones that are out there, using the ACH system, the automated clearinghouse, where you automatically get your payroll check deposited to your account, or you make your payments automatically to your mortgage company or whomever. There's not much acceptance there. The one that's really getting some attention now is crypto. Uh-huh. And the complexities of crypto are significant. That'll take 2 or 3 shows to talk about that. But companies are looking at crypto. People, and more from a business standpoint, if you looked at that last chart within that supply chain, exchanging funds and for payments for services in crypto is easier on a business-to-business level. Consumer to business is a little more complex, because crypto in the United States, in a lot of cases, is considered a security. So when you pay for something in crypto dollars or crypto coin, then you may have to pay a capital gains tax, because it's like selling a stock mm-hmm. to pay for something.
Interesting, my goodness. Very interesting. Now we're going to talk about obstacles. What are the obstacles banks face today in offering services to the industry?
Well, one is going to be their regulators.
Bring up the next slide, please. Primary hurdles working with marijuana-related businesses in the future.
As you see from that slide, we did a survey about a year ago of about 85 banks, different parts of the United States. And one asked them, are they currently banking cannabis businesses? Yes or no? And then based upon that response, when they filled out the rest of the survey, we aggregated the results. And for the banks that were not banking cannabis, you can see on that, number one concern is illegality. And then the compliance challenges. There's a metric out there right now that says for every 7 cannabis businesses a bank brings in, they need 1 full-time person, compliance person, to deal with it. And so it's very expensive from the bank's perspective. That's why the banks that do offer these services, they're charging $1,500, $2,000, up to $3,000 a month in service charges for these cannabis businesses. Board objections. You may have some board members that, for ethical or moral reasons, don't want you to do it. And so presenting a business case to them is going to be a challenge for these banks. And we're going to get into alphabet soup here, but you have anti-money laundering, AML, called in the BSA, Bank Secrecy Act, KYC, which is Know Your Customer. All these police actions that banks have been authorized to take on tracking money to make sure it's not funding terrorist activities. A lot of this goes back to post 9/11 activities that banks had to undertake to try to track money.
For instance, I think there is there's a deposit or withdrawal of more than $3,000, the bank has to report.
10,000.
Pardon me.
Does it fit in with my natural market? Does it fit in with the culture of my organization? Do I have the skill sets to understand the business? In a lot of cases, you may want to hire somebody from the industry to interact with these businesses and then have them followed by a banker so that the person doesn't give away the shop. But have somebody that can talk the talk to the business person. Because right now there's a huge gap in communication between a banker and the cannabis business.
What are the main ideas that you would like our audience to take away with them?
One is that cannabis is here to stay. I do think federal legalization will happen, probably not in this presidential cycle, and depending on what parties in control after 2024, we'll see what happens. Although you see some Republicans that are pushing for this in different parts of the country. Congresswoman from South Carolina is pro-cannabis. So the other thing to consider too is the complexity of the business. If somebody's considering getting into the business, how complex it is and what the costs are going to be to operate the business. And if you're a banker, you really need to understand the complexities of the business. And particularly each state regulation is so different. Everybody thinks of cannabis as one or two things: THC, which is you get high and happy, or CBD, which is supposed to solve all medical ills. But there are really upwards right now identified close to 100 cannabinoids that fall underneath those two major categories, and then close to 300 other chemical compounds within the cannabis plant. And so understanding how each of those will work, testing and research are going to be critical over the next few years to really, I think, gain consumer acceptance that, yes, this is, taking an aspirin or a Tylenol. This is what this product will do for me. Right now, we just don't know.
Michael, I want to thank you so very much for coming on our show.
Sandra, thank you for
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure.
Until next time, this is Speak Up. I am Sandra Schulte. Goodbye.